Tonight, though, we wanted to welcome the newest member of the 207 team. If you are from Maine, you have been watching this man for the last few decades. We are talking about the one, the only, Don Kerrigan.
Watching longer than you ever believed you'd have to.
Don will be joining us now on 207, bringing with him his experience covering stories in literally every corner of the state, and we are so lucky to have you here.
Thank you. I'm lucky too. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, we'll dive more into that too coming up later on in the show, but we are diving right in, putting Don to work with a story about the Owl's Head Transportation Museum, where you actually may be able to find your dream car.
Yes, you might well be able to. This is the weekend coming up for their annual New England Auto Auction, which sells this year, I think it's about 230 classic cars, some of them very rare. And so we've reported on this before, and the art auction is an important fundraiser for the museum. It's also a lot of fun. If you love old cars, as I do, you can look at them online, you can go up and look at them in person and dream a little bit. But it's also got stories, because a lot of old cars and trucks have stories that go with them, and we found one of those stories that we just had to share. For some of us, they are dreams built of steel and shine that still excite imaginations. At the New England Auto Auction, you can buy an elegant Model T, a rare Packard Woody, or this near-perfect '65 Mustang, complete with memories. My first street-legal car was a '66 Mustang convertible. That's kind of where the comparison with this one ends. Mine was rusted and only cost $300. But here at this auction, there is another '66 Mustang, and that one has to be seen to be believed. It's a Mustang Group 2 race car built by the legendary Carroll Shelby, one of only 16 made that year, a car that set records and won big races.
You know, I won the first 2 races I drove in this thing.
A car driven very fast by John Mac McComb. What was this thing like to drive? Is this a rocket?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. There's a, you can't imagine. I mean, it's 400 horsepower, and the car weighs 2,600 pounds.
McComb had been racing small MG cars when he was recruited to drive his first Shelby Mustang.
I took to that thing, it wasn't this car, but I took to it like a duck to water. I qualified the thing second.
He didn't win, but he was hooked, and called Shelby to buy his own car, but there were none left. Then fate intervened. This Mustang had actually been built for racer Ken Miles, featured in the movie Ford versus Ferrari. But Miles never got to drive it. He was killed testing another car. The people at Shelby then called Mac McComb and offered the car to him. 2 weeks later, he raced it on the Trans Am circuit and won. So you had a pretty good debut.
I would say so. The 6-hour race that tied us with Chrysler, I won by 6 laps.
He helped Ford win that year's Manufacturers' Championship.
Was in this car. We were at Daytona, and the long back straightaway, it was going about 166. And I looked out the other window, and there are posts holding the wire fence up at Daytona every 10 feet, and it was a solid gray wall. I have never looked out the other side of a window since. It scared me to death.
Mac raced this car for 2 years, then sold it and began racing a '67 Shelby Mustang. Later, he raced for other manufacturers. You had a pretty good racing career.
I did. I was twice national champion, and I drove for 6 factories.
He eventually retired to Maine about 10 years ago and began volunteering at the Owl's Head Transportation Museum, where Toby Stinson learned the story.
In my head, an unofficial mission, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I'm not gonna rest until we get John's car at the museum.
Toby just happens to be in charge of the annual car auction.
Because the history has to be completed, we have to tie the circles back together.
And they did just that. Both Mac and Toby had kept track of the old race car, now fully restored, with the names of the builders, owner, driver, and mechanic under the hood, along with that tricked out 289 V8. The museum and the owner got together, and the Shelby Mustang is now the centerpiece of this year's auction.
On its own, this is a world-class artifact that's worthy of any historical interpretation.
But add John McComb's history, he says, and the mission is now complete.
I can't tell you, having this car back has brought back so many memories. And they had me get in it and start it the other day. And you have no idea what the sound of a 289 Ford engine does to a race driver. It makes your hiney tingle.
Someone will pay what's likely to be a high-octane price for the car. The museum is estimating $800,000, even $1 million. It will probably go to a private collection or a museum, but Mac McComb thinks the Mustang deserves better. But it ought to be driven.
It ought to be driven. That's what it was made to do.
That from the guy who drove it first. Now, that auction starts Friday night, but Saturday is the day when they'll auction off pretty much all of the cars, including that Shelby Mustang. You can view the whole list and the auction, in fact, online, or you can go up and watch some of it in person. We, of course, will let you know how much that car goes for, and if we find out, who buys it. And, you know, the Owl's Head Transportation Museum is a wonderful place. They've got a fascinating and huge collection of old cars, airplanes, really history of transportation right there. And if you go, and if you're lucky and time it right, you might be able to get a tour from none other than John McComb.
Wow, that would be really, really cool.
Yeah.
Great story, Don. Thanks for kicking it off with us strong. We love it. And Don will come back at the end of the